From pop culture to politics, this is the Michael Medved Show.
And another great day in this greatest nation on God's green earth. And what a great day for, well, for Lindsey Graham, the senator from South Carolina, clobbered, totally outdid, won more than 50% of the vote against four major opponents for another term in the U.S. Senate from South Carolina. So congratulations to Senator Graham, a big winner in the primaries that occurred yesterday. And those primaries mostly counted. That is a good thing. But there are new warnings, meanwhile, from President Trump about the dream of a wonderful deal. It remains elusive. And in fact, President Trump was saying that the U.S. will resume attacks on Iran today, citing slow progress on negotiations for a deal to end the war. And after the downing of that U.S. Army helicopter, which cost more than $40 million, that, of course, is taxpayer money, as it should be. This is our defense of our country. But still, thank God the two crew members were rescued, and they were rescued with amazingly sophisticated equipment that I didn't even know existed until now. It's a sea drone, and a sea drone that picked them up out of the water after they were shot down. The talks are still ongoing. Trump said that all Iran has to do is to start signing a paper to reach a deal with the U.S. A source told CNN that a Qatari delegation is meeting with Iranian negotiators in Tehran in an effort to bridge remaining gaps. Well, those gaps have to do with the two items that are most fundamental, gaps in destroying, ending, confiscating enriched uranium, and ending the nuclear program of the Islamic Republic of Iran. But they also involve opening the Strait of Hormuz and ending the boycotts on both sides. And that appears to be problematic, partially because of what Iran is demanding of us. Iran has been targeting U.S. bases. It said that it launched retaliatory strikes on American bases in Jordan and Kuwait after the U.S. military said it struck Iran in response to the Apache helicopter downing. In Bahrain, a video geolocated by CNN appears to show a flash of light from the vicinity of a U.S. base. It's unclear how much damage has been done, but with that helicopter, they are reporting in the Washington Post, the helicopter that was downed and the crew members who were rescued, that is one of 42 U.S. aircraft that have been destroyed or damaged so far in this war. The impact in Iran, explosions were heard in 3 locations around the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's state-run broadcaster reported the strikes that hit 2 water reservoirs, cutting the area's water supply. The dispatch reports that the U.S. struck Iranian targets yesterday evening after President Donald Trump blamed the country for the crash of a U.S. Army helicopter near the Strait of Hormuz the previous day. The U.S. Central Command said the proportional response carried out by the Air Force with Air Force and Navy fighter jets targeted Iranian air defense sites, ground control stations, and surveillance radar near the strait. Iranian state television said explosions and air defense sirens could be heard on Keshem Island, which is strategically located near the Strait of Hormuz, which Iran has effectively closed to shipping since the war began. And in the cities of Sirik, Jask, and Bandar Abbas, the site of a key Iranian naval base. We thought that their navy had been destroyed. That at least is what the White House had said. Well, again, still an explosion at an Iranian naval base, which apparently is still functioning. Early this morning, Iran fired ballistic missiles and drones at bases hosting U.S. forces in Jordan, Bahrain, and Kuwait. Nearly all those missiles and drones were intercepted with no casualties or damage to the bases. Meanwhile, on another front of battle, and politically something that is even more important, not only do we have the results of the primaries in Maine, in South Carolina, and South Dakota, and elsewhere, and we'll get to the political message sent by those primary results, but there is also new news on inflation. President Donald Trump brushed off a spike in inflation driven by the war in Iran, insisting today that the numbers are great. I love it, he said, of new data that showed annual inflation hitting a 3-year high. I love the inflation. Could there be a difference between the president and the rest of the country? Why does he love the inflation? It takes some explanation. Trump's remarks came shortly after the Bureau of Labor Statistics reported annual inflation hit 4.2% in May, way higher than it should be. The goal is inflation at 2% or below. But the numbers were propelled mainly by energy costs that have risen sharply since the U.S. first struck Iran earlier this year. Why did he say, I love the inflation? You know why, because as soon as this war is over, I can say it now, something you didn't know. This is President Trump talking, of course. Do you know we've been taking out millions of barrels of oil? Nobody knows it. You know who doesn't know about it? Iran. Until right now. We took out the other night 22 ships late at night with no lights because they don't have any radar, because we blasted the crap out of it. I am not sure what the president means or why this explains his love of inflation, but we will explore that. There is also this. The 2026 World Cup, which opens tomorrow, arrives at a politically complicated moment for President Donald Trump, whose second term has drawn criticism both at home and abroad. His hardline immigration policies, which have left some international fans feeling unwelcome in the U.S., are overshadowing the countdown to kickoff. And again, here in Seattle, we will be watching the Iranian World Cup team. They have a match, and I think that's the right language, with Egypt coming up. All of this fits together. A new survey shows that among Europeans in 15 countries throughout Europe, only 11% of the public believes the United States is an ally, considers the United States an ally, marking a record low in transatlantic relations. The figure represents a decline from 16% just 6 months ago and 22% in November of 2024. This is down from 22% to 11% of Europeans who consider us an ally. Why does that matter? And where do we go from here? And what do the primary results yesterday mean for our future? We will get to all of that and more coming up on the Medved Show. And on the Michael Medved Show, the primaries yesterday in Maine and South Carolina and across the country elsewhere, including South Dakota, produced the kind of results that people were by and large expecting. For instance, Graham Plattner won the Maine Democratic primary for Senate, despite the allegations about his past, formally setting up the November bout for a seat that could be pivotal in determining which party controls the Senate. That's the way the Washington Post described the race in Maine. The liberal upstart, that's their euphemism to describe Graham Plattner. The liberal upstart will face longtime Republican Senator Susan Collins in a closely watched race that will show whether the Democratic and independent voters whom Plattner has courted will overlook all of the baggage, all of his baggage in the general election. Meanwhile, Plattner advanced to the November election despite revelations about his past resurfacing throughout this campaign, including about a tattoo resembling a Nazi symbol that he later had covered with another design, and allegations of troubling conduct in former relationships with women. He's been married for 3 years, and the word that was used by one of his former girlfriends was unsettling. And yes, it included some incidents of described violence. The point about Plattner winning is that the more likely Democratic candidate had been the state's governor, who was 78 years old. And her name was Janet Mills. Her name still is Janet Mills. And she pulled out of the race when it looked fairly certain that she would not win a primary against Graham Plattner. And that primary, of course, is what occurred yesterday. Political insiders, the Washington Post reports, were watching the margins in Maine closely to see whether there would be a protest vote cast for Governor Mills, who also appeared on the ballot despite having suspended her campaign in April. She had about 20% of the vote, so not particularly impressive when the Associated Press called the race. But given the fact that she wasn't a candidate, I guess it shows that there are at least 20% of Democrats who have their doubts about Graham Plattner and what he stands for. Collins, who is the incumbent who is seeking a 6th Senate term, means, of course, she's been in the Senate for 30 years. She ran unopposed in the Republican primary. She will try to keep her winning streak alive in a state where Trump lost to Vice President Kamala Harris by nearly 7 points. So this is a state where Plattner has the advantage of the Democrats carrying the state in the presidential election. But it is unclear whether the fact that Trump is not popular in Maine is going to impact Susan Collins, the Republican candidate, negatively, because she's been distant from President Trump, despite the fact that he said she is a sane person, and which is why he appears to be close to endorsing her, which would probably be helpful in terms of the fact that despite the fact that he didn't carry the state, there are still Republicans in the state of Maine. Some Democrats, the Post reports, are questioning Plattner's general election odds. They once saw the oyster farmer. He has only been an oyster farmer recently. He wasn't raised that way. He didn't grow up that way. Basically, his father, after the military service that everybody knows about because Plattner has talked about it so incessantly, after the military service that he provided, he wasn't sure what to do, and the oyster farm seemed like something he could do while holding local harbor master duties. Some Democrats are questioning Plattner's general election odds. They once saw the oyster farmer as the party's best shot at unseating Collins because he had cultivated a strong base with his populist anti-establishment pitch. But his recent spate of bad publicity has added a dose of anxiety. He briefly addressed mistakes that I regret, that I live with, that I continue to learn from. That was his victory speech last night, saying, "It is my job to earn your trust, faith, and support, and I will spend every day of this campaign, and if I have the privilege, every day in the United States Senate, doing exactly that." In other words, he's going to be aiming on earning people's trust and explaining away all the embarrassing incidents of his past. That's what he's going to do. Here is what he said in his victory speech last night in Maine. This is clip 10.
Thank you all very much. I want to thank my mom and my dad.
They've been supporting him.
Who have loved me unconditionally for 41 years, even when it wasn't easy. If you believe, as I do, that we can change our politics and change our country, then you must also believe that people can change. And the reason I believe that is because I have lived it. And the reason that I have lived it is because of my wife.
His recent wife. They've been married 3 years. Congratulations. We're also going to be taking a listen to more highlights from Graham Plattner's very smoothly delivered and effective victory speech last night. He will be a formidable candidate for Susan Collins to take on, but there is a very welcome positive comment, which we will share with you, from President Trump about Susan Collins. Despite the fact that she actually voted to remove him from office, she was one of the 7 Republicans who had voted for Trump's impeachment on his second impeachment trial. We'll also be taking a look at the race in South Carolina, where Nancy Mace, the congressman from the Charleston area, was running for governor, and she initially was considered a very big figure in the future of the GOP. But how did she do in the race? Not particularly well. We will get to that and more coming up on The Medved Show.
The Michael Medved Show.
Listen.
Nationwide.
Listen.
And around the world at michaelmedved.com.
And listen.
And on the Michael Medved Show, there is a very persuasive editorial that has been written by Bret Stephens for the New York Times, and it suggests that Plattner's candidacy offers an opportunity. An opportunity for what? Voters in Maine's subheading have a chance to say no to partisan double standards. They have a chance to do that by making sure that the Democrat Graham Plattner does not win the general election against Susan Collins, who is running for her 6th term in the U.S. Senate after 30 years in her position. And it isn't clear to what effect, if any, Graham Plattner's multiplying personal scandals will have on his chances in the Maine Democratic primary that's occurring as I write this. Obviously, he wrote this yesterday, to say nothing of November's general election against Susan Collins, the incumbent Republican senator. We will get to more on that. We're still taking a sample of Plattner's rhetoric and his ability to deliver it. He gave a memorable victory speech, which sounded some grace notes about grace, that Graham, even though he is not known to be a particularly religious individual, that Graham Plattner brought into his victory address last night in the Republican primary. This is clip 9.
Grace is not inevitable, but here in Maine, sometimes it feels like it is. And that is something I will never take for granted. It is a mighty gift and one that I am committed to extending outwards.
Okay, and what does that mean to extend grace outwards, given some of his past behavior? And also, one of the most recent revelations, he has been a member of Kik, which is a website, a service that is particularly associated with improper relationships, sexual relationships with kids, people below legal age. But don't let that bother you, because he is talking all about grace and redemption and trying to convince people that all of the misdeeds with which he has been associated are in the past. Again, Graham Plattner on winning the Democratic primary for his candidacy for the U.S. Senate in Maine. This is clip 20.
Redemption is not just some simple or easy destination. It's a journey. I've made mistakes in my life, mistakes that I regret, that I live with, and that I continue to learn from. And I'm still far from perfect. But every day I wake up and I try to be a little bit better and a little bit kinder than I was the day before. And if you give me the chance, I will be a senator for the people who cannot afford to buy a senator. I will stand up for you and against billionaires and greedy corporations. I will serve you, the people of Maine, not some lobbyist or party boss. I will be the champion for your dreams as if it were my own, no matter the challenge or the expense. I will fight for you. I have been willing to die for my country. There is nothing that I will not do for the state of Maine.
Is he implying that he is willing to die for the state of Maine? That is where he is rhetorically. Now, of course, President Trump doesn't, at least so far, have a clear candidate in the race. But what is fascinating is that President Trump had in the Oval Office some good things to say about Susan Collins, who is probably accurately diagnosed or described as the most moderate Republican in the U.S. Senate, somebody who has been encouragingly independent of some of the worst aspects of Trumpism. She also was somebody who favored a close examination of the Epstein files. No, despite all of that, President Trump had these kind words about Susan Collins. This is clip 16.
You mentioned the Senate race in Maine. Are you all in supporting Susan Collins? Does she have your full support and endorsement?
She does, because she's a sane woman. She's not my best friend at all. These guys are. I get along well, but I have some. But she's a sane person. And she's a person that never missed a vote in many years. I mean, she's like had 10,000 votes. She had 10,000 votes. She never missed a vote. Unfortunately, because sometimes she voted against me. Look, she's a sane woman. And she's a respected person. Maybe a little different ideology than me. But this guy is a thug. He's a fake thug. He's a phony. I made a lot of money picking out phonies. He's a real phony. He's a bad person.
Okay, when he talks about I made a lot of money by picking out phonies, is he talking about his television program, The Apprentice? Probably, perhaps. But it's encouraging to hear President Trump actually putting the fate of his party and his party's control of the Senate ahead of any personal reservations he might have concerning Susan Collins. In terms of the Bret Stephens assertion that voters in Maine now have a chance to say no to partisan double standards, what he says, there are two good, if contradictory, possibilities from the Plattner candidacy in Maine. The first is absolution, not only for Plattner, he writes, but for every nominee or candidate, Republican or Democratic, with a blemished personal history, on the grounds that we elect or install people in high office to achieve the results we desire, not to serve as paragons of moral rectitude. If nothing else, this could make our politics less repellent to talented, if imperfect, people who now steer clear of public service because they don't want to put themselves or their families through the inevitable media inquisition that comes with every campaign. The second possibility is consistent judgment of anyone, Republican or Democrat, who falls far short of clear and unyielding standards of moral conduct. Perhaps this will finally correct the political barriers that formerly prevented shameless people, our current president not least, from degrading our politics and setting a putrescent example of what is and what isn't necessary to reach the high places of public life. And what is the rest of his argument? We will get to that and to the results in South Carolina involving Senator Lindsey Graham and Nancy Mace and more. Coming up on the Medved Show.
Join in your daily dose of debate.
I listen to you occasionally when I'm driving. It turns my stomach every time I do.
The Michael Medved Show.
And on the Michael Medved Show, the incumbent senator in the state of Maine, the one that Graham Plattner is running against, is Susan Collins, who has served 5 terms in the U.S. Senate and is going for her 6th term in office. She has often been underestimated and tends to do better in elections than she does in polling, and who knows why, but it's a pattern in her career. She was in the Capitol building at the time of the election. She had no opposition for the Republican nomination. And she talked to reporters in the halls of the Capitol about her opponent coming up in the election this November, Graham Plattner, and all of the scandals now associated with his name. Here is Susan Collins, clip 6.
Allegations against Graham Plattner are extremely troubling, is serious, and he owes the people of Maine a detailed answer.
He says that this is Are you ever been this time, even given the controversies he's faced?
Listen, we're a long ways before the election. Today is primary day. Let's see what happens in the primary.
He says that.
Okay, she says, let's see what happens in the primaries. Obviously, one of the things about the impact of the Biden presidency and, yes, now the second term of Donald Trump is going to be working against Susan Collins, which is she is old. And obviously, Graham Plattner is 41. He's considerably younger and sounds more vigorous. However, Susan Collins also has an honorable record, and it looks now like she does have maybe not the enthusiastic support, but the general support of President Trump when he says he prefers her because she is sane. That's not necessarily true about the way that voters in Maine feel about Graham Plattner. For instance, there is a Maine voter who spoke to Scripps News about Plattner and had this to say. This is clip 4.
Frankly, of reading about some of the things he's said and done, I think the allegations are just reprehensible.
Yes, they are reprehensible, and they should put him out of this prospect that he would be one of our 100 U.S. senators. And what are the allegations against him again? This is from Bret Stephens' commentary. He says, what ought to stop is what we have now, inconsistent standards selectively applied according to our political bias. Lest you've been wintering in Antarctica, here's what's lately been learned about Plattner, the 41-year-old combat veteran and oyster farmer. That his wife had told a campaign aide that he had been trading sexually explicit messages with 6 women and perhaps as many as a dozen before the beginning of his political run. That a former girlfriend, Lindsay Fifield, alleged that he had lied when he claimed that he did not know that a chest tattoo that he had gotten during his military service strongly resembled an official insignia of the Nazi SS, and that he had once referred to it as my Totenkopf. That Fifield also alleges that he had once twisted her arm behind her back, shoved her into a bedroom, and held the door closed from the other side so she couldn't get out. And that she later described him as the most toxic, literally abusive man on earth. That she said he referred to women as hatchet wounds, using a crude word for female genitalia. That other women romantically connected to Plattner also described behavior that they considered unsettling. Fifield also told the Times that, quote, he said this a lot. If anybody ever broke in here, I would rape them. Adding that he told her it would be in a sexual way, not in a gay way. He was like, quote, I would rape them to show that I'm dominant. Less okay, writes Bret Stephens, is to watch some of the same progressives who thought that Brett Kavanaugh's alleged misbehavior as a teenager in high school and a college student made him unfit for the Supreme Court suddenly become dismissive of the allegations against Plattner, which are far more serious. Seems like a lot of nothing, said Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, Democrat of Rhode Island, who once thundered against the meaning of the word Ralph in Kavanaugh's high school yearbook. Democrats like Elizabeth Warren and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez have also been notably agnostic when it comes to the charges against their main favorite. Whatever happened to that slogan, #BelieveWomen? The term for this is double standard, writes Bret Stephens accurately. There's an alternative, he says. Democrats can live up to the view that no election is so important that they're willing to discard the things they once fervently claimed to believe in order to win it. They can cherish the idea that what counts in politics is more than just a relentless quest for a majority and for power, and that staying true to principle isn't just a game for suckers. They can refuse to follow the president into the moral tar pit in which he long ago sank the Republican Party. Ouch. And I think highly persuasive. And talking about double standards, Senator Chris Coons of Delaware spoke to CNN about the scandal-plagued Graham Plattner. This is clip 17.
He had a tattoo, which, is a Nazi tattoo. A Totenkopf there has definite Nazi symbolism. The New York Times and the Wall Street Journal reported there was physically violent toward an ex-girlfriend. There were all the posts he made. He says that's not concerning. Is that the same view of concerning that you have?
Well, John, that's a judgment the voters of Maine will ultimately make. But of course, I have concerns about his tattoo and the story, about whether he knew what it meant or not and when, and concerns about the allegations. Democrats have held our candidates and our colleagues to high standards, particularly when it comes to any allegations of sexual assault. But I also respect the fact that the voters of Maine, like most states, did not like national party leaders coming in and anointing one candidate over another.
Okay, again, he says that Democrats once held high standards. You remember Al Franken, right? Who was actually a seated senator, and he was accused of coming up and squeezing the breasts of a model who was touring the world with him, and she was asleep, and he came up and posed for photographs with his hands in her breast area. Okay, that was the end of his Senate career. And the charges against Plattner are so much more serious. And this is not an advertisement for Al Franken or for Donald Trump. Coming up next, President Trump says he loves the inflation. Okay, why did he say that? And what's behind it? We will get to that mystery and more, all coming up in this greatest nation on God's green earth.